It's clear, we come from different ages. Realization come in stages, leave them spellbound like mages. I run through enemies like medieval knights with maces. Many spaces above you like outer spaces.
What's up, my wizards? Dev from SBMTG. Down there, we got decks and stuff. About a week ago, I asked you what you'd like to see, and the overwhelming response, definitely, was from Mardu Allies. We've done a lot of testing here, and there's a lot of different ways to build this deck in this format. So we're going to go ahead and do a good old-fashioned double deck tech. We do these from time to time. I'm going to give you a budget option for this deck, a very budget option, costs you about 20 bucks on TCG Player, and then I'm going to show you the upgrades and sort of a separate whole deck tech. I think you can actually make this deck very powerful. So let's go ahead with the budget build. Well, I want to go ahead and start off the budget deck tech by saying that we're playing 4 copies of Zulaport Cutthroat and 4 copies of Kalastria Healer. I'd mentioned before, which one you'd rather see is sort of Rally the Allies with Rally the Ancestors or March from the Tomb, that kind of deck, or just a straight up pure aggro Mardu Allies deck. Now, after digging a little bit deeper, it seems that Mardu Allies doesn't really have the option of playing a bunch of, pure value creatures that have, a good power to toughness ratio for their mana cost. It really doesn't have the ability yet, at least, to do that. So we really need to play, because these are the best 2-drops that we can possibly play in Allies right now. So we've got to play them regardless of whether we're doing the Rally the Ancestors strategy, and they lend themselves more to a sort of mid-gamey kind of almost grindy type strategy, which the deck does pretty well with. If you're just trying to attack for 20 damage by turn 5, it's just not going to happen with the layout of Allies that we have right now. So we got to play these guys, and that's fine because they're really good, especially against mass removal. And just incremental damage is incremental damage. That's always good, There's no reason not to play these guys. I feel like a lot of times you're going to win the game off of these 2 people right here. We are going to play a 1-drop, by the way, 4 copies in the budget build of Expedition Envoy, which is in some ways a controversial choice. For a lot of Allies players, this is a card they don't want to have to include in these more budgety builds, but they feel like they kind of have to. It's an Allies trigger. Late in the game, it's not a terrible top deck because it's an Allies trigger. Usually just a 1-mana 2-1 would be an awful top deck, but, early game, this is fine. I feel like a 2-power 1-drop is good against a lot of the other 1-drops in the format. And a lot of 1-drops people are playing don't come down on turn 1. I.e., Dragon Master Outcast, Warden of the First Tree. You're totally happy with trading this. Or, a lot of times against some decks, it can get in for as much as 4 or 6 damage before they put a lid on it. 4 copies of Kor Bladewhirl in the deck, which I'm not super ecstatic about playing or anything, but just a second ago, I was telling you how Allies doesn't have a lot of great options, good creatures that are good deals power toughness-wise for their mana cost. Well, this is as close as Allies comes right this second, and it's not a bad card. I don't want to rain on it too much. A lot of people say they aren't thrilled with its synergy with Drana, which I understand that, but I don't want to pin all my hopes on synergies with Drana. We're only playing 2 copies in the budget build of Drana, so I think it's a really good option to be able to give all your creatures first strike, make blocking much harder for them. So 4 copies of Kor Bladewhirl is fine. It gives us another 2-drop, which we really need, and again, not a bad deal for the mana cost at all. 2 copies of Drana, I was just talking about her. Drana has fallen significantly. She was close to $20 when she first came out. Now you can snag her at low price, about $5 on TCG Player. That's a hell of a deal, because she may get a little bit more significant when the next set comes out. I think Allies as a whole may become more significant, so look out for Drana. But we'll have to wait and see. That's all speculation. But as far as right now, Drana is probably the best creature that we can play in an Allies deck. Just the best straight-up creature, Probably not the best card for Allies, but the best straight-up creature we can play. And when she does work, she works super well. It's really good that she flies. We don't have that as an option in any of our other things, so we really, really need that. And she's a buff in and of herself, Just everything about Drana is good. We have to play at least the 2 copies. 2 copies of Firemantle Mage in the deck, which sort of is like it's reminiscent of Mogus's Marauder, but Marauder felt way better. But in any case, this feels really good to March from the Tomb back into play. That can be awesome. And once we've got something out that creates an ally every turn, depending on what deck we're playing, then this can get really, really good. Giving all of our creatures menace pretty much every turn sometimes is just amazing. Making our guys harder to block is great in board stall situations. Good top deck, although it hasn't performed very well on curve. We're not doing much with it on curve, We can do like 4 damage on curve. But aside from that, really, really, really good top deck, especially in these sort of board statey situations that are basically wars of attrition. He can be really good. 1 copy of Chasm Guide in the budget build here. He's not We're not running him in the upgraded version, but Chasm guy can be really good with March from the Tomb, obviously, you know. It sucks that he fulfills half the total converted mana cost that you can get with a March from the Tomb. That's a little lame, but he can be a killing stroke late in the game if they're not prepared for it, which they often won't be. A lot of Mardu Allies decks don't play Chasm guy, and I think he's actually one of the best reasons to add red in a budget build of this deck, to be honest with you. Otherwise, I would just play white-black, you know. But this guy, I think, is a really good option, a great surprise tool. Him and Firemantle Mage are both good reasons to play red. But in any case, I like the option of after you play this guy and he sticks on the board, every ally you play for the rest of the game has haste. That's pretty good, too. 2 copies of Lantern Scout, which I like to have the option of. It started off as a full 4 of Lantern Scout, but I just didn't like him as much as I thought that I would. And I've played Lantern Scout before. He's been fine and all, but he's just really, really killable, which is a problem. And, you know, I will say this in his favor. He doesn't have to swing, you know, you can just play another ally, everybody gets lifelink, you can keep him safe, that's one thing. But he'll still get like Fiery Impulse, Silkwrap, Wild Slide, a million things. So there's a lot of stuff they can do to this guy. But he's a pretty good tool to have. We're just sort of running high on the 3 drops, which is fine. I already said that we're a more mid-rangey deck than a lot of, you know, sort of aggro-y decks. We're a much more mid-range deck. We can afford to play more 3 drops, but I kind of want to keep it a little lower than it is, so I felt like this guy wasn't as important as I first imagined him. Although can be a really good top deck later on in the game in those same like board steady situations I was referring to earlier. 2 copies of Alesha, which I actually think is sort of a no-brainer, and a lot of Allies players are starting to play Alesha. I'm going to let you down, Ziggy. In any case, a lot of Allies players are starting to play Alesha. And I can totally see why. This card is tested very well. It is quite fragile. That is one problem that it has. But it just is obvious. Once you start playing it, it's so obvious. That's another reason we can cut down on Lantern Scout, by the way. But this can pull a Drana out of the yard, which is really good. And pretty much any other creature except for the next creature I'm going to talk about. And I believe Chasm Guide. I can't get that out, which is kind of lame. But like, who cares during the attack step? You know what I mean? But every other thing, it's really good with, especially Drana. So yeah, Alesha, I think, is a must-play in this Allies deck. And finally, 2 copies of Butcher of the Horde here. This is a really good finisher, by the way, here. I wasn't playing this for about half of the testing period, and then I decided it was just the perfect thing, you know. This sort of allows us to ride the line between an Aristocrats type sort of rally deck and just a straight-up aggro deck, or really a mid-rangey type aggro deck, because we're relying a lot on Healer and Cutthroat to do a lot of the work for us. But this allows us to swing in for that last 5 damage, and it's super awesome for doing that. We can pull things that it kills, you know, if we sacrifice something, we can pull them out of the graveyard with March from the Tomb or Alesha. That's a pretty good idea right there. And Butcher the Horde, honestly, he's just going to swing in for 5 damage and win you the game. Like a lot. Of course, we have to play some spells in the deck, and there's a lot of really good spells in the format for this deck. I'm going to go ahead, though, and play 3 copies of Fiery Impulse. This is one of the only removal pieces that we're playing in the budget build. We've got a little bit more removal in the more upgraded build of the deck. I think it's important. But for the most part, I just want to blow away small dudes in the early game to allow us to sort of clear a path and take care of problem creatures in the early game, especially something like, you know, Manus Rider, that sucks, or Jace, Soulfire, Morph creatures. There's a million things we can blow away with an Impulse. And I want to get rid of all of them in the early game. And a lot of times you can play an Impulse and still play a creature, so that's good too. Here's a couple of 4-cost enchantments for the deck. 2 copies of Retreat to Emeria and 1 copy of Outpost Siege over here. And you could switch these, but I think Retreat to Emeria is really good. I was playing 4 copies of it, but it turned out in the budget build I wanted to come down on the 4 drops. We've got a few of them in the deck, but I still wanted to run Outpost Siege. So I'm going 2 and 1 here. Emeria is just obvious, I think. It should be, in a lot of ways. This allows us to get an ally trigger on turns where we don't draw an ally. That's a good thing. Or it just allows us to buff all of our creatures and swing in. Along with a Drana buff, you know, that can be really, really good, obviously. Our creatures can get big fairly fast if Drana hits even once and we get a land. So that's super sweet. So a Retreat to Emeria, I think, is sort of a no-brainer for not playing Gideon, which is exactly the situation we're in the budget build. And then Outpost Siege just works absolute wonders, especially in conjunction with something like Zulaport Cutthroat, allowing you to do, you know, double the damage if you need to. You can, you know, sacrifice your whole board to Butcher the Horde if you have an Outpost and a Zulaport Cutthroat out. And you just did like a butt ton of damage. I was going to say something else, but a butt ton of damage right there before you even swang with the Butcher of the Horde. So swung with the Butcher of the Horde. So that right there is a win condition. And if all else fails, we can just draw 2 cards a turn effectively, and sometimes get 2 ally triggers, which can be cool too. And to finish it off, 2 copies of March from the Tomb in the deck. An important-ish card to play, you know. Like I said, we're putting stuff in the graveyard with Butcher of the Horde, and creatures are going to die just because of combat damage, period. So March from the Tomb, and just from getting removed. So March from the Tomb is an important card to play, good for resiliency. A lot of times we can get like 3 or 4 dudes out of the graveyard with this. And if we're able to get a couple of healers back, maybe a Cutthroat with a Butcher out, you know, we can just end up dealing a lot of damage out of nowhere. Here's the lands in the budget build, 25 of them, just like in the big boy build, you know. But this, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I want to be able to play Smoldering Marsh in this, but it just costs too much. Same with Bloodstained Mire. Those are very important, but we'll get to them when we upgrade the deck. Here's the sideboard for the budget build. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through and point out every single card like I sometimes do, but I am going to highlight Infinite Obliteration. This is starting to see a lot of sideboard play because of the popularity of Eldrazi decks. This card exists. And everything else in the sideboard here I think is just pretty self-explanatory. It's what we're playing in a lot of sideboards. And here are your power rankings, a final score of 57 for the budget build here, which is not terrible for a budget build. We've got decent resiliency, especially for an aggro deck, ostensibly an aggro deck. You know, we play a lot of creatures and all. So, you know, honestly, 57 could be better, and we will make it better. We'll upgrade it a great deal here in just a second. But right now, this deck will only cost you anywhere between about 20 bucks, give or take $1 or $2, and $30 or $35 on TCG Player, depending on whether you go by the low or the medium prices. Very good deal, very good jumping off point. So I think Mardu has a lot of options in the format, and this is a pretty good way to get started. Well, I'm not just going to give you a list like I normally do for these double deck decks. I'm actually going to go through card by card here and tell you why we changed certain things and, you know, what we haven't changed. We're not playing the 1-drops in the upgraded deck. That's the first order of business. I just don't think it's as important. This deck is even more of a mid-range deck, and I just don't feel like we have the room for it. It feels like the weakest card in the deck, so when I'm adding more important cards, it was definitely the first card I cut. We're still playing 4 copies of Cutthroat and 4 copies of Healer because they are integral to our strategy here. Just remember them. I mean, I've already told you everything about them. We win in the long game off of these guys. You know, we have to play them. We're playing 3 copies of Kor Bladewhirl in the deck. Just 3 copies, and I really, like I said, I don't know that I want to play the guy at all, but we need as many ally triggers as we can get to reasonably call this an allies deck, and it's still a pretty relevant ability, so I'm going to play at least 3 Kor Bladewhirls because that way we can have some pretty good 2-drops. 3 copies of Drana in this deck. If we've got the money, I want to play the 3 copies. You might say Legend Rule, but there's a lot of stuff out there right now that can kill Drana. You know, Silkwrap, Fiery Impulse are 2 important things right now. And she's just got a huge target on her back. High priority target, probably the biggest priority for them to kill creature-wise in the entire deck. So they're going to do it. You might as well play as many Dranas as you can. 2 copies of Firemantle Mage, just like in the budget build. Still an important card to play. Very good late game top deck. 2 copies of Alesha, just like the budget build. I feel like this translates very, very well. I'm still doing the same job that it did for us in the budget build. An important card to play. 2 copies of Butcher of the Horde. I'm still doing that too. The card was so good in the budget build that I had to translate it to this build of the deck. It's just, I can't tell you how incredible the stinking card is. It is very, very often our finisher. But here's where the deck starts to differ quite a bit. We're playing some Planeswalkers in this one. Obviously we're playing 4 Gideon and then 1 copy of Sorin. This is most of the money in the deck, and I apologize for that, but Gideon is just a no-brainer. With Gideon, we have 20 cards that either are or produce allies, and Gideon gives us an ally trigger every single turn, almost no matter what, as long as he stays around, and he can buff all your creatures at the end, you know, whether you need to do it right when you play him or later on in the game. So everything about Gideon is an absolute must. If you have the money, definitely play Gideon. And then Sorin, I think, is sort of self-explanatory too. If you had a couple of bucks, you could play him in the budget build pretty easily. And Sorin is just amazing. Sorin is great on those big swings. He keeps our life total up, and he makes creatures, and if you can get his ultimate off, he will win us the game. Like, we're able to swing in with all of our other dudes and just win because they're going to be sacrificing creatures like crazy. So just, I love everything about Sorin. I want to play at least the 1 copy. Well, here's where we take, you're all right, Ziggy? Here's where we take a pretty hard left here. We've expanded our removal suite by quite a bit here because we want to be able to keep up with a lot of the most competitive decks in the format, and start off, we can do that by playing some copies of Crackling Doom, right? We're in the colors for it, and if you just got a couple of bucks, you can play this in the budget deck. This is one of the most important removal pieces in all of Standard. A little bit of incremental damage gets rid of the biggest threat on their side of the table. Everything about Crackling Doom is a yes for this deck. Like I said, easily slots into the budget build if you've already got the copies, or if you're willing to spend a couple of bucks. We're still playing 3 copies of Fiery Impulse in this deck. I think they're still important, and we get to play Silkwrap as well in this one, which is fairly expensive compared to a lot of the cards in the budget build, so I didn't include it there. But again, easily transferable, portable over to the budget build. A very important card is Silkwrap. We all know that. We've got 1 copy of Kolaghan's Command in this main deck here. Really helps our resiliency out, makes control, discard a card, kills small creatures, hits them in the face, does a lot of stuff, kills hangerback walkers and stuff if we needed to. So Kolaghan's Command, pretty versatile. I want to at least have the singleton copy and a supplementary copy in the sideboard. And to finish it off, we're playing 1 copy of March from the Tomb. These tricks that we're playing in the budget build aren't as important to us in this deck, mostly because we've got Gideon and Soren to do a lot of our dirty work for us. So we don't have to rely on these, March from the Tomb kind of tricks, although it is still good to have the option of marching in a few healers if we need to. 25 lands in this build, just like the other one. This one we're able to expand our lands by a lot, and it really, really helps. We get to play fetches, and battle lands and stuff. Shambling Vent's important, so this is definitely the mana base you want to play. And here's our board for this build. Not really that much different than the budget build, We do get the option of playing Hangerback Walker here, which I could see playing in the main deck, but I just love his synergies with, Zulaport Cutthroat and Butcher of the Horde and even some other stuff that we're playing, So Hangerback Walker all day. I just like to have him around. And here's your power rankings. A final score of 66. You're able to improve it by 9 points, which is pretty freaking good. And 66 is not bad for a competitive deck. And it's a really good jumping off point. I think Mardu has a lot of really, really good stuff going for it. You can play Dragons, Mardu Dragons with Kolaghan and Thunderbreak Region and Draconic Roar is a very good deck right now. And there's a couple of ways to build it too. So I think Mardu is very versatile, and this is sort of a good way to start to get your feet wet when you're trying to play competitive Mardu in Standard. The bad news is this deck will cost you about $400 to $550 on TCG Player. Much, much steeper cost, but I think it's a pretty good investment, especially the Gideons, which will be around for a very long time. Well, what are we doing next time? I really do want to do Noyan Dar soon. I've got Lucky Charms almost ready. I've been really working hard on that. I'm still working on modern deck techs for you guys too. I know I got my modern people. So let me know how you feel about that. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out Rapzan. I worked really hard on this and it's doing pretty well. I've got a lot of positive comments and a lot of new subs. Welcome to the channel if you're new from this. And even the professor stopped by to say that this is cool. So stamp of approval, and I appreciate that very much, Mr. Brian, Professor Brian, sir. Thank you. If you enjoyed the content, I hope you did. Just like, share, comment, subscribe. All those things help, especially just hitting the thumbs up really helps and takes like no time to do it. You are a cooler person for having done that, and I am Devin. This is Ziggy from SBMTG. See you next time. Thanks for watching, my wizards.